Hollow Knight and Hollow Knight Silksong are an incredibly unique case study. Silksong started out life as a DLC, with the development most likely starting even earlier than the reported 2019 date. This DLC turned sequel was for one of the most beloved indie games of all time, and this sequel went on to become the most wishlisted game of all time on Steam. Hollow Knight is synonymous with great game feel, amazing combat, top quality movement, and known as one of the best metroidvanias in terms of mechanics and exploration. So with all this, how does Team Cherry top the original? Did they top it with Silksong? What did they change? Why did they change it? And was it for the better? In this video, I'm going to be going over all the key differences between the most crucial aspects of the titles, the main characters, Hornet and the Knight, and try to answer this question. And just to clarify, as I have put out a few shorts on Silksong and Hollow Knight, and I've seen via a lot of comments people's opinions and feelings on my perspective of Silksong, when I might say something in Silksong is better designed than Hollow Knight, I am not saying that Hollow Knight is, as a result, worse than it was before Silksong released. I am simply saying that through 6+ years of development, Team Cherry might have just improved the formula in some areas. Just saying. Right, so let's kick it off with a difference between Hornet and the Knight that sets the tone. Hornet can speak, which if you don't know, but can probably imply, the Knight cannot. Through dialogue, Hornet gives us a great understanding of the type of person she is, whereas the Knight was designed more in a way so you could just slot yourself more easily into his shoes. Hornet is strong, fierce, determined, but above all, incredibly sure of herself and her perception of the world. This can all be gained very easily through just a few interactions he has with the bugs in the opening area of the game. As the Knight does not have this, again it is more about how the player reacts, either out loud or internally to the world around them. There is no particular lens to see interactions or the world through, it's just how you feel, and that's kind of it. With this, I'm not saying either of the two choices, to have dialogue or to not, is a good or bad design decision, but with what I've said in mind, let's move on to the first change, which I think illustrates this difference between the Knight and Hornet the best. The crests or charm system. In Hollow Knight, you collect charms as you traverse the world. These acted as passive perks which would do something on an input of another action, for example releasing spores every time you heal, or would just give you a passive benefit like the compass showing your location on the map. To stop you from having as many charms equipped at once, the equip restriction was that you only had a certain number of charm slots, and each charm would take up a number of different slots. Some of the more basic ones would take up 1, more advanced would take up 2. And this is something you can upgrade as well, to get more charm slots and therefore more charms. The combination of these charms and what they do is completely down to the player. They could go for an all attack build, an all defense build, or even an economy build. They could have a mix and match between different builds and so on. I believe this reflects the mute, blank slate of the Knight really well. With Hornet, the crest system is different in one key aspect: the restrictions on equipping. All crests take up 1 slot, but crests themselves have a type associated with them. They can be a tool, which is an offensive crest, some of which have active abilities like the straight pin crest. They can be a defensive type, like a crest which protects you from heat, or a utility crest, which is where the abilities like the compass or the economy crests are categorized. At the start of the game, there is only 1 slot for each, meaning you cannot have 3 reds or 3 blues. You can't go all in on one particular build. As the game progresses, you can unlock more slots for particular types, so you can unlock extra attack slots or extra defense slots, but these slots stay rigid. From a design perspective, if the goal is for the player to have freedom of choice and to build any combination of builds they can think of and allow for creativity to help overcome encounters and obstacles, the Knight's charm system is actually designed better. However, I feel like the crest system just isn't designed for that. Like Hornet, it's very highly committal, highly rigid, and you have to, like Hornet, be sure of yourself with your decisions. The system still allows for creativity, especially as you unlock more slots, for you to combine a smaller number of crests for specific boss battles. But the system is less so about creating builds to overcome the entire game or most challenges, but instead as a tool to be used to react to the boss you are going to be facing or the area you are currently exploring. You need to solve a particular problem, craft your crest setup around that. Then once that is done, figure out what problem you need to solve next. With that in mind, I really think the new crest system is very different to the charm system, but at least equally valid, and 100% a better design system for Hornet as a character contextually. Now, in defense of the changes made to the combat system, let us stick with the contextually appropriate nature of the design change before diving into the fundamental game design. The Knight's combat was 4-directional, meaning he could attack up, down, left, or right. Due to the knockback on his own attacks that the knight would receive in terms of force and consistency, this combat system was revolutionary for marrying highly aggressive gameplay with clever platforming and hit mitigation. This was primarily achieved with what is referred to as the pogo, meaning if you jump over an enemy or any environment which would do damage like a spike and then attacked downwards, you would be knocked back into the air and you could continuously pogo the same way. It is safe to say the majority of the vocal fanbase loves this, and it is beautifully designed, there's no doubt. The game feel is exceptional. It is hard to do initially, but because it is consistent, once mastered, the player truly unlocks another layer of strategy and skill. Now, it helps significantly as well the fact that the pogo wasn't a mechanic taught to the player at any point, it was something discovered, so players will feel ownership of this mechanic. With that being said, I think something we can all agree on that is very highly commendable, or at least very brave, is changing the pogo for Silksong. Now, before getting into it, I am very aware that there are multiple crests that can revert this pogo back to the original, but I'm just talking about the base combat here. Hollow Knight's combat system isn't 4 directional, but it's 5 directional. Up, left, right, diagonal down left, and diagonal down right, with no straight down attack without crest. This means that the pogo, as players know and love, is gone and is replaced by something else. Now, especially at the start of the game, the gut reaction from the vocal player base is of course going to be negative based off everything I've just said. Hollow Knight has been out for 8 years, with players replaying that game so many times that a fundamental change like this is going to be seen as negative. But let's take a step back. Why is it negative? Firstly, and admittedly, the consistency isn't as obvious. The knight's pogo was in the consistent hitbox below him that was very small, meaning that whatever he was hitting would have to be right below him. With Hollow Knight, the down attacks have some distance to them. This distance is less than her maximum jump height, so it is very common as you are learning to do the down attack to jump to max height, do the down attack, and the attack stops before hitting the enemy on the floor, usually resulting in the player taking a hit. This has a negative effect on the consistency field too, as the knockback is consistent, but the location of the thing you hit isn't. Let us use meters as an example. Say the enemy is 1 meter away, but the knockback is 2 meters. You will now be 1 meter higher than you was before. Say the enemy is 2 meters away, you will be knocked back to the same location as you were. So there, just in those 2 examples, that's a meter difference between 2 of the same input action. Now, this can be frustrating to the players as it's not consistent where you'll end up after a knockback, which is a bigger issue when it comes to platforming areas of the game than it is combat, but it does affect combat too. Now, this can be best illustrated in Hunter's March, an area early on in the game which asks a lot of the player with regards to pogoing using the new system. Probably the biggest and loudest PSA from the audience has been to make sure you get a crest to give you a downward pogo before going to this area, showing that the vocal fanbase felt that the new downward attack wasn't a new and exciting challenge to overcome, but was something to avoid. I think the new pogo is great design for 2 reasons. I'm just going to put that out there. Firstly, it matches Hollow Knight's personality, like I've said multiple times throughout this video already. It's highly committal, very aggressive, and it needs to be done in a certain way. You need to play around the way Hollow Knight moves, not the other way around. Secondly, platforming is a big challenge in both of these games. I think it's great design to change something so that it can be as hard as it was when players first played the first game. I feel most people complaining about the new pogo forget how hard it was to do initially in Hollow Knight, which is probably less hard than they are finding the new pogo because of that built-in muscle memory and intuition, even though it's executed differently. Of course, Hollow Knight has become a comfort game for many people. Many of these people have been grinding Silksong since the second it launched, so a change this significant could leave a sour taste, and it definitely has for some people. But at the same time, do players really want areas designed to be challenging to feel easier because they're used to the first game? Or do they actually want the sequel to give them the feeling of challenge and sometimes frustration that they felt when they played the first game, but maybe have forgotten? For me personally, I think it was a bold design decision, but a great one for these 2 reasons. One thing that is questionable for me is actually the inclusion of crests which revert back to the old system. It does lose the game's opportunity to convert the most frustrated players, and as I think with enough time, especially with the completion of the Hunter's March platforming challenges, especially the first half, the percentage of conversion would be higher. I know that I was converted after completing the Hunter's March anyway. Now, I mentioned movement in that spiel. Not to go into detail regarding upgrades, because I don't want to spoil it too much, though there are some significant improvements there. I would like to stick to one of the most basic but incredibly important changes to the moveset of Hollow Knight compared to the Knight. The clamber. The clamber does wonders for game feel, of course. To just miss a ledge but then grab onto it is a result I didn't realize I needed until I played with it. But secondly, and this is way more subtle, and you probably have felt it but you might not have noticed it, is that areas are so much more open now. Platforms don't have to be as close. If you went back and played Hollow Knight, you will realize just how claustrophobic some areas can be in comparison. Which isn't a bad thing. I think if anything it was designed intentionally for most areas. And they did let certain areas breathe like the City of Tears. However, in Silksong, they can let areas breathe consistently, but allow you to fight and platform using platforms dotted around the level, all thanks to the clamber. Flying and jumping enemies have a lot more room to maneuver, inviting more challenge and variety, and the gorgeous backgrounds of these levels have more real estate to shine because there are fewer platforms blocking them. Additionally, the clamber works really well with the new pogo, especially due to the inconsistent feeling of the knockback. Being able to save yourself by clambering onto a ledge is a great feeling. Overall, there isn't much else to say on the clamber other than it's just a great design decision, which improves on the first game in a significant way. Finally, I want to move on to healing. This change was something most players would have felt maybe first or second depending on their actions. In Hollow Knight, the Knight could only heal one mask at a time, taking a third of their default capacity jar of soul for each. He couldn't move during this, but he could cancel the animation. Cancelling this animation would result in the soul from the jar being used, but no mask being generated if they did it before the mask was generated. In Silksong, Hollow Knight firstly cannot cancel her animation, or at least not by letting go of the healing button or moving. It can be cancelled by getting hits as an alternative way, but I assume most players would want to avoid this. This change obviously, and yet again, aligns with her more committal and sure approach and personality. But the second change is this. Silk, which is this game's version of Soul, needs to be built up to full, rather than just a third, in order to heal at all. And when the player heals, all the silk is used at once, which is incredibly binary. And this heal, by default, heals 3 masks at once. This means instead of finding a bunch of small windows to heal 1 mask at a time, or watching the enemy closely to see if you could get just that 1 extra mask healed in time, you simply wait for a window where you think you can save for just 2 seconds to heal 3 masks at once. Now in that description, I am implying that this new health system does lose a lot of what was great about the health system in Hollow Knight. As the Knight, you really did feel like sometimes you were just getting away with a singular mask, which could save you from a one-touch game. With Hollow Knight, the tension is entirely in the build-up rather than the execution. Because gaining enough silk to heal once takes as many hits as it would take for the Knight to fill up an entire jar of soul, the time between being able to heal at all is 3 times as long. So that tension of dodging and getting 1 or 2 hits in and dodging again, coupled with the longer and more committal healing window, does give Hollow Knight's healing mechanic that much needed tension that was there in the first game. But I think you can't really deny just how good the healing was in the first game. Both are great, both encourage aggression, especially as any ranged attacks don't grant soul, and both add to the tension of the experience. Both are great design. Now there are plenty of other small changes and differences between Hollow Knight and the Knight, and then there are hundreds of other changes in the actual games themselves. But I think that the majority and more obvious ones have been covered in this video. Even if you disagree with some of my points, hopefully you can see where I'm coming from as a game designer. Regardless of how well a game is designed, art is subjective, and maybe this interactive art form more than others. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you are making your own metroidvania, as I'm sure many indie developers are starting to do at this point, I hope you learned a thing or two about how these design decisions were made, or at least why they were made. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, tune in next week for another entry to the game design library, and keep on keeping on.